Vitalis New Beginnings by Jason Halstead. Copyright 2024. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now strap in and enjoy the story. Chapter 1.
Kira.
Captain Sharp snapped, drawing the attention of his navigator.
Captain.
She jumped, hitting her knee against the steel at her station. She was tall, and her predecessor had been considerably shorter. The handyman on the rented mule hadn't made it up to adjust the ergonomics for her yet. She clenched her jaw to bite back the pain and turned to face him.
Sir.
He grinned to show her he was amused by her reaction.
It's a milk run, but have contingency courses plotted. This isn't the core shipping lanes we're flying.
Yes, sir, I've got 2 backup routes and a warning alert in place for proximity.
Sharp nodded.
Good. We're still on schedule for the jump in 2 hours.
Aye, sir.
Sharp turned away from her and looked at the rest of the small bridge of his transport vessel. He was a private merchant who made money trucking goods for the highest bidder. The rumor was so far he'd only handled legal fare, but that was only because the right offer hadn't come along.
Where's Dan?
He was in the galley last I seen him, Captain.
Sharp grunted, then hit the ship-wide intercom on his chair.
Dan, report to the bridge.
Nearly 3 minutes later, a mildly overweight man with a scar running from his disfigured left ear across his cheek and nearly to his chin stomped through the hatch to the bridge.
What's up, boss?
Sharp turned to stare at him.
The galley is 20 feet away.
Had to finish my sandwich. Skeet was eyeing it up.
Skeet's a songbird in a cage.
Never trusted birds. I seen rebels running greenhouses on Venus using birds to communicate to each other.
Tarn protested.
You got problems. Look, we're jumping to the Altair jump station and heading from there to the mining stations. We unload mining equipment and pick up ore to ferry back to the smelter. There's a good reason for anyone who knows our payload to be interested, and Altair is not heavily populated. I want to make sure our defenses are up. Are they?
Tarn snorted.
Best they ever been, Cap. Shields are ready, and the damages from that last brush when we was chasing that comet are fixed.
Weapons?
Yeah, plasma defenders are good.
Sharp grunted.
Make sure you set up early warning alerts when we get in system. It's a 3-month trip, and I don't think you want to be the only one up for it.
Tarn laughed and waved his hand and then headed off the bridge.
I'm an ex-Marine, Captain. I'm always ready.
After he was out of earshot, Kira turned and caught the captain's eye.
What?
Sorry, sir.
Kira, you're new, but so far you haven't screwed anything up. You got something on your mind, you say it unless it's about me, and then you tell me in private.
She nodded and swallowed visibly.
Okay, sir. I thought there was no such thing as an ex-Marine.
Sharp nodded slowly.
Yeah, me too.
Chapter 2.
Hey Kira, you looking forward to the cold sleep?
Kira turned away from her locker, holding the shirt she'd just taken off over her chest.
Eric. I didn't know you were in here. I'm sorry.
Eric Sackman shrugged, the movement going all the way to his prominently displayed penis. Kira jerked her head up from watching it bounce, blushing fiercely.
Got doused in some coolant while I was patching up a leak in the pushers. Something always goes wrong every time we jump.
Kira nodded, glancing down at him again as he waved his arms to finish drying off the water that the blowers hadn't gotten. He was a small man, or so she'd thought. He was several inches shorter than her and looked pretty scrawny in the coveralls he usually wore. The height wasn't a problem, she was taller than most people, but now she saw that Eric was lean but also solid. And of what weight he did have, well, there was a good-sized chunk between his legs. She looked away, blushing again.
Hey, relax. It's gonna happen from time to time. We got 1 locker room and 1 shower, even if there are 2 stalls in it. Only 3 heads in the whole ship. There's 6 of us and not a one that hasn't seen the other naked. You're going to have to get used to it or…
Or what?
Kira turned back to look at him. He smiled, showing perfect teeth.
You know what they've been calling you?
What?
Legs.
She shook her head and looked down. Her pants were still on, and they covered her legs. She was tall. A lot of that length came from her legs. She'd kept them in great shape with whatever aerobic exercise she could find, depending on where she was at and what she was doing.
Better than boobs, I guess.
Eric laughed.
It's not that they're not fine.
She laughed with him after a minute.
Okay, all right, I get it. Loosen up. This is not how I saw my future happening.
Yeah, I hear that.
She stared at him, surprised.
Really? I mean, oh crap. I'm sorry. I didn't mean anything by that. I'm just flustered.
I've evolved over the years to look the part, no offense taken. What's got you flustered?
She wanted to tell him, trying not to stare at the enormous piece of meat between his legs, but her cheeks caught fire at the scandalous thought.
Me being half naked and all.
I could turn around.
He offered without moving.
Or you could just get used to it and drop the shirt.
She bit her lip as she considered it. Sooner or later, everybody would see her. It only made sense. She nodded.
All right, but there better not be any new nicknames.
Eric's face went from a smile to being purely blank, and then he caught himself and nodded with a smile.
I don't know. I can think of a few fitting ones.
She rolled her eyes and tossed her shirt into her locker. She knew the blush had spread from her face to her chest, but she refused to back down. She turned and grabbed the waist of her pants before she could come to her senses. They dropped, and she reached in for a change of clothes. She heard a gasp come from Eric.
Problem, Mr. Sackman?
She inquired as sweetly as she could. She glanced over and understood immediately. What had been hanging impressively was now pointing directly at her, and it was exponentially more impressive.
You'd better put that away before you put somebody's eye out.
Or spear me in the kidney, she mentally added. She shivered at the thought, but tried to disguise it by changing into her workout clothes.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do about that.
Kira glanced at him again after she finished dressing. He was still staring at her with an erection strong enough to act as a landing strut for the rented mule. She smiled again, knowing this time that he wouldn't notice the redness of her face, and then turned and walked out with a little extra sway of her hips. She bit back the giggle until she was out of the lockers and heading towards the passageway that circled the cargo bay. The cargo bay had been vented for this trip, but the access passage around it was the only decent option for exercise. She turned the corner and looked down the long passage. 3 dozen laps later, she figured she was close to 3 miles in. A short run by her standards, but life on a transport was never promised to be one of luxury and accommodation. She headed back to the locker room, wiping sweat from her brow. She stepped in and saw Captain Sharp putting on some running shoes of his own. He glanced up at her and did a double take.
Check the display, Kira. If it says occupied, you stand fast. Last thing I need is a bunch of sex-crazed men running around this ship because you walked in on them in the shower or something.
Kira stared at him, thoughts firing off in her brain so quickly she couldn't identify them.
Pick your jaw up, it's okay. I was finished anyhow. Going to get a run in before we sack out. Looks like you already did.
Sir. I wasn't.
Sharp chuckled.
Relax. Just pay more attention. This is your first run, you're nervous. I get that, it's okay. Everything's set up all right in the computer.
She nodded, finally managing to seal her lips together.
Good. Get yourself a shower, but be sure and hit the button on your way in. Last thing you want is Tarn stumbling in on you.
Kira shuddered. The thought of the fat ex-Marine ogling her body made her nauseous.
Yes, sir. Sorry, Captain. I'll be more careful next time.
He nodded.
I bet you will. Otherwise, I'll have to make sure I'm the one who walks in on you.
Kira gasped, causing the captain to laugh at her as he walked out of the locker room.
Never had the need for a lock, but if it's a problem, I can see if Eric can rig one up.
At the mention of Eric, Kira's eyes narrowed.
No, sir, it's fine.
He shrugged and headed out for his own run. Kira followed him, just enough to turn and see the display that was now obvious to her. Letters that clearly indicated occupied or unoccupied, along with a red and green light. She shook her head at her own naivety and walked back into the shower. She slapped her hand on the button to set the display to occupied, and then went to her locker. Her shower did little to cool the growing anger inside of her. She slipped into comfortable clothes for the cold sleep, but instead of heading to the hibernation chambers, she called up the whereabouts of Eric Sackman on the computer. He was in the engine room. How fitting. She hoped he was getting dirty again. When she found him, he was just replacing a panel on a console. She waited until he turned before stepping up and slapping him. Hard. Eric's head snapped back, and he took a half step away from her to catch himself. His own hand went to his cheek, but the flare of rage she saw on his face drained once his eyes met hers.
Oh shit, Kira. Oh no, you've already changed. Oh shit, oh shit. Look, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean for anybody else to oh shit. Who was it?
Captain Sharp.
Oh, okay, well at least it wasn't Tarn or one of the cargo monkeys. Still, he didn't see anything, did he? Shit, Kira, it was just a little joke. I didn't mean for.
Aren't the cargo monkeys your man?
He nodded, looking miserable while he did so.
I was going to tell you, but you just got naked in front of me, and I couldn't think straight. Then you left, and I realized I had to tell you, but before I could, the captain ran into me and asked me about a repair I'd told him I'd finished up, except I hadn't really finished it yet. So I had to bust my ass to get that fixed, and then I was going to come and tell you. But
I run faster than you thought.
Kira finished for him. She shook her head and poked him with her finger in the chest.
I'm the new girl, I know. I'm going to catch some shit, I know. You can fuck with me all you want. You can make me run stupid errands and give me the shit work. But don't act like my friend unless you mean it.
Kira turned, still royally pissed off. She didn't know what else to say or do. She'd hit him, and she'd yelled at him, everything should have been fine. But it wasn't. With a growl that threatened to turn into a sob, she started to walk away from him.
Kira.
She hesitated, but kept walking. The door was only a few steps away.
You're beautiful.
She stumbled, stopping at the door.
Look, I'm sorry. I'll say it every day to you for 3 months while you sleep, and I do nothing but stare at your hibernation chamber if you want. I don't rattle easy, but the confidence and the sexiness you showed me just knocked me on my ass. I couldn't believe it. And yes, I'm shallow, but you're the hottest thing that's ever set foot on the rented mule, even better than the girls the captains brought back from time to time.
Kira grabbed the hatch and slammed it shut, and then turned to stare at him. She walked back over, her feet landing heavily as a message of her mood.
You fucking with me again?
He shook his head so hard she thought he might bruise his brain. She grabbed his shirt and pulled him closer.
Because if you are and I fall for it, I'll shove your ass out an airlock first chance I get. Got it?
This time, Eric nodded with equal fervor.
Good, now shut up.
Kira stared down at him for a moment, her tall figure all the more imposing for her anger. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. He gasped, giving Kira the opportunity to press the kiss deeper and move in for the kill. She crushed herself against his muscular body until she could feel his interest pressing against her leg.
You like confidence?
She asked rhetorically. He nodded, but she had already started talking again.
Take your clothes off.
He had to lean against the machinery to keep his balance as he stumbled to obey her. Kira removed her own clothing at a calmer pace, though inside her heart was racing. She'd never tried the dominant thing before. It was exciting. Seeing him proudly on display again made her mouth water and her thighs clench. She was tempted to toss the dominance out the window and beg him to take her, but she wanted to make sure she did it right.
Oh, Eric, I may be the bottom of the ladder around here, but I've got a lot of things you're going to be doing for me.
Eric's answering groan was silenced by her mouth.
Chapter 3.
Kira,
The navigator groaned as the words filtered through the disturbing images of her dream. She'd been reliving some very pleasant aerobic activity with Eric one moment, and then felt as though she'd been sucked through the wall of the ship to be immersed in the absolute zero temperatures of deep space the next. She coughed, feeling like her lungs were coated in ice water. Somebody grabbed her, helping her up and over a metal ridge that pressed painfully into her ribs. She gagged some more, dry heaving until she could hear straight. Spittle hung from her lips, and chills racked her body.
Kira, we've been dumped out of cold sleep. Your prox warning is going off. What's going on?
Captain Sharp demanded. Kira looked up slowly, wincing at the pain in her chest, throat, and head as she did so. He looked pale and miserable, but his actions spoke otherwise. She nodded and forced herself up, fighting back a wave of nausea.
Cold, sir.
Walk it off, damn it.
He snapped, perhaps a concession to his own condition. Kira nodded and pulled herself out of the pod she'd been in. The others were either doing likewise or were standing around in robes. She felt a tug and looked down, her head clearing as she realized she was still fully integrated with the hibernation chamber. The light blanket that had covered her nude body was still on her, but she'd given the captain quite a show in spite of it. She glanced up when she heard a scuffling sound and saw Eric was struggling into a robe and trying to join them. He brought a spare robe for her. That's nice, she thought, and then her view of her recent lover was blocked by the captain.
Kira, snap to.
Sorry, Captain. Never been dumped before.
She reached down and removed the catheter, grimacing as she did so, and then slipped off the sensors that were adhered to her body and head. She held the blanket tight and forced herself to climb up and out of the cocoon-like bed, taking the robe from Eric with a grateful smile and slipping it on. Her feet were cold on the steel floor, but she could tell from the captain's tone she had no time to worry about that.
Prox alert gotcha, sir.
Sharp and Eric followed her as she walked stiffly out of the hibernation room. Her body warmed and began to obey her as she walked, allowing her to pick up the pace. By the time they reached the bridge, only a few short minutes later, only a faint headache persisted. She touched the data port on her palm to the matching port of her station, and then proceeded to mentally send the navigation system commands. The large display at the front of the bridge responded almost immediately, allowing them all to see what had transpired.
That's not an asteroid.
Sharp growled. He turned to Eric.
Get down up here now.
Eric took off with barely an
Captain.
tossed over his shoulder. Kira started thinking out loud as the data flowed through her cybernetic link to the computer.
That's why the dump from cold sleep, sir. The autopilot adjusted course, but so did the other ship. It's closing with us fast. ETA is less than 10 minutes. It must be accelerating. I don't understand. Even a cold dump takes hours. This hit my outer threat range 17 minutes ago.
Had some modifications done to our chambers. You're going to feel like hell for a week or so because of it, but most of the time it's only temporary.
Sharp explained.
Most of the time, sir.
Guy who done it said he only had one case of somebody suffering permanent brain damage.
Kira swore.
Hey, we prefer to let them board while we're still snuggled up in dreamland. What happens then? Pretty thing like you might get raped a few dozen times before they sold you as a slave. The rest of us most likely get our throats cut if we're lucky.
She nodded at the captain's logic. He said no more until Eric returned with a grumbling Tarn behind him.
Tarn, where's your threat sensors? And the plasma defenders? Why aren't they online and tracking?
Tarn ignored him, staring at the screen and deciphering it.
Fuck. Must be bugged up.
He muttered, and then turned away to head over to the security station.
Don't give me that, you said everything was fixed. Get them up and running now or I'll shoot you at them.
Kira risked a glance at him and said,
Sir, we don't know who it is. It could be another transport or even a naval vessel.
Allah.
Eric slipped up quietly beside her chair and pressed his hand against her shoulder. Kira glanced up at him and smiled. This proved he wasn't the kiss and tell type, and that he would still respect her in the morning. Then again, after the things she'd made him do in the heat of the moment, she wasn't sure she could respect herself. Sharp confirmed Eric's assessment.
Free agent would be steering clear of us. Naval vessel would be broadcasting to us. This ship's silent. You tried hailing.
Kira nodded. It was standard procedure on seeing another ship, especially one with an intercept vector.
No response, sir.
Tarn.
Hang on. Must be a bug in the activation code. The program's in there, but it never executed properly.
What about our guns?
Enemy ship is out of range. They'll be ready when it gets closer, though.
What VE they got to use on us?
Tarn laughed bitterly.
This is a transport. No sensors worth a damn on here. Mining rigs got better eyesight than this thing does.
Kira looked at the captain and saw the muscles in his jaw flexing. She felt Eric squeeze her shoulder again. Her own free hand went up to rest on top of his.
Are these pirates?
They're not a welcoming committee.
Tarn muttered. Kira stared at him, eyes narrowed. Eric gave her shoulder another squeeze, forcing her to relax. She looked at the display again. Even though they could all see it, she felt the need to announce,
7.5 minutes, sir.
Tarn, how long until they're in range?
4 minutes.
Glad I spent so much on the weapons you recommended.
The ex-Marine wisely chose to stay quiet.
Kira, what's our position? How long were we under?
A little over a month, sir.
Kira had already figured that much out from the data on the display. She input several more commands to analyze the stars and compare their position.
Otherwise, we're on course for the mining region, roughly 2 months out. The rotation of this system's planets and stations are further from us than a return to the jump station would be.
Sharp swore again.
No outrunning them either, I bet.
The display popped up a new frame with calculations and text within it. The answer was clear seconds later.
No, sir.
Kira parroted the system's visual display.
You better hit those sons of bitches so hard they get turned into a wormhole.
Tarn grunted as he sat sweating over his chair. Kira stared. She could see the sweat running down the side of Tarn's face. She was still chilled to the bone, and only the adrenaline of the moment was keeping her from falling to the deck. She glanced up at Eric again and saw the misery in his eyes. He smiled in spite of it when she caught his eyes, which prompted a strange flutter in her own stomach. Her first real relationship, and he was an engine jockey on a dead-end tanker in the middle of nowhere. She bit her lip to fight back the tear and then smiled back at him. It wasn't his fault that she'd fucked her own life up so badly that a desperate shot at running away on the rented mule was her only way out.
5 minutes, sir.
She croaked loudly. Sharp's hand rested on her other shoulder, squeezing so firmly it hurt. Then it was gone. Kira felt her heart thundering in her chest. Something she had read was next to impossible after being dumped out of cold sleep.
Where are Jeff and Kevin?
The captain asked.
I told them to get suited up and stand by for emergency repairs. They can handle pressure leaks and basic electronics. I've been showing them a few things.
Eric said.
Might need you in the engine room.
Kira felt Eric's hand stiffen on her shoulder. It might have been because she was suddenly squeezing his so much harder.
Sir, I'll keep an eye on things. Call me if I'm needed.
He pulled his hand away, but the warmth of it lingered on her shoulders. Kira set her jaw and blinked away the tears. After everything she'd done and all the sacrifices she'd made, this did not seem like a fitting way to die.
Sir,
She announced, looking at a fresh readout on the display.
we're being.
Lights flashed, and an alarm went off, even though nothing seemed amiss.
We're under attack, sir.
Damage.
It was a relativistic projectile. No breach, but it definitely hit us on the port side.
The inertial suppressors eliminated the shock from spreading throughout the 2,000-ton ship. It was neither graceful nor pretty, but the rented mule could certainly take a beating. A few seconds later, another alert sounded, followed by fresh damage indicators. This continued for several more rounds, each spaced a few seconds apart.
Sir, they're firing something large enough to clear our avoidance field, but not big enough to do any serious damage.
Done.
Just a damn minute.
He growled. Then he slammed his finger on the panel, triggering the plasma defenders. Sharp stared at the display that showed the star field in front of them, watching a green mist streak out so quickly it was barely identifiable. It disappeared into the blackness, giving no indication of what had transpired.
Well,
Limited sensors, sir.
Kira said. Tarn let out a whoop.
I got the bastards.
The ongoing alerts continued.
why are we still being fired upon?
Didn't say I killed them.
Tarn snapped. He went back to his display and began hammering in fresh commands. He snarled as 2 more plasma shots went out, both missing.
Sir, less than 2 minutes until they're on us.
Roll us 20 degrees so I can bring both plasma guns online.
Do it.
Sharp snapped. Kira rolled the ship, firing the thrusters manually to save time. She arrested the roll too late, but Tarn had already triggered his attack. The starfield display went blank. One of the frames on the main display stopped scrolling updated data.
What happened?
Something else hit us.
Kira replied. She was desperately trying to make sense of the data, inputting fresh queries to the system.
An energy weapon, I think. Looks like they found our primary sensor modules.
So we are blind.
Kira fought with her system several seconds before she slumped in her chair.
Looks like it, sir.
Shut those damn alarms off. Internal sensors will still tell us if there's a problem.
Kira silenced the alarms and stood by, expecting to have to cancel a new one in a few seconds. She realized she'd have to do it constantly and wondered if there was a way to issue a command so that only a different type of alarm would sound.
Did you cancel everything?
Sharp asked her as the seconds ticked past silently.
No, sir. Trying to figure out how to differentiate between the existing attacks and more serious ones.
You may not need to. They've stopped shooting at us.
Sharp stared at the unmoving displays and then turned to the ex-Marine.
Tan, did your last shots hit?
Of course. Both barrels down the throat.
Your sensors show the damage before we lost them.
Tarn grunted as he tapped clumsily away at the display.
Feedback from the sensor loss must have wiped out the logging.
So you don't know for sure.
That range, there ain't no way I could miss.
Kira glanced up and saw the stare down between the captain and the security officer. She looked away, hoping she could ignore the growing tension in the room.
All right. No. I got no way of knowing what shape they're in now.
Tarn admitted. Sharp stabbed the intercom button.
Everyone suit up now. Our attackers have destroyed our sensors, but we believe they've also been damaged. If they board us, they won't give us the time to arrange a welcoming party, they'll just blow the hull. Suit up and stand ready to repel boarders.
Sir, should I?
Go get your suit. I'll mind your station until you get back.
Yes, sir.
Kira hopped up and hurried to the airlock. She met Eric on the way, and they grabbed each other's hands briefly, and then let go, and hurried on when Tarn came huffing along behind them. The suits were unisex and universally uncomfortable. Kira grabbed the tallest one and turned to glance at Tarn. Eric looked up, catching her gaze, and then slipped between them while the ex-Marine busied himself with displaying a very hairy back and butt so he could slip into the suite. With him distracted, Kira shucked her robe and jumped into her suit, zipping it up quickly before fixing the helmet on. The onboard system powered up and did a system check. With a few adjustments, it read off a list of green statuses. Kira turned to see Eric helping Tarn into a different suit, and then waited patiently for the porcine man to be ready.
Get back to the bridge. I'll help Tarn finish up. You're needed up there.
Be careful.
Careful's my middle name. Legs.
Kira squeezed her eyes shut and clenched her fist at Tarn's voice over the suit-to-suit radio. He chuckled even as she turned and stormed off. Her station at the bridge was far from comfortable in a bulky spacesuit. They had evolved and improved over the years, but still weighed 25 pounds and remained bulky enough to make even a runway model feel like they were wearing a fat suit. She settled in as best she could and then had to break the seal on her suit so she could route the suit's internal data cable to her palm. After she resealed it and noticed the captain trying to look everywhere but at her, she applied the external cable to her station to allow her direct input to the system.
Sorry, sir.
She said, somewhat out of breath.
I'm ready now.
Kira, the bridge is yours. Do what you think is best should the situation require it.
Sharp gave her a tap on the shoulder that she barely felt through the suit, and then he turned and left the bridge. She stared after him for a long moment and then turned back to look at the partially functioning screens. She swallowed loudly, aware that the only thing she could hear was inside her own helmet.
Okay, let's see what we've got left.
She muttered, feeding fresh commands into the computer as quickly as she could think them up.
Chapter 4.
A week passed without further incident. They were blind on the inside, but they remained alive. Of the pirate that attacked them, they heard nothing further. Hour by hour, they struggled to come up with alternative plans to restore functionality to the ship. Aside from cutting power to the engines, nothing was viable. Eric had done a couple of walks on the hull of the rented mule to assess damage better. The ballistic projectile the pirates had used had cracked, bent, and done damage to numerous portions of the ship. 3 thruster ports were damaged or destroyed. The main airlock was inoperable for the foreseeable future, and even one of the pushers had been damaged and knocked slightly out of alignment. The primary sensor array had been fused into a mass of metallic junk. Shielding that protected it from asteroids and incidental physical contact had done little to spare it from the high-power energy weapon that had fused it into a single piece of metal. As frustrating as it was receiving no positive news or answers, Kira found the best way to get through the sickness of being dumped out of cold sleep was to stay focused on her job. Between that, running, and spending a lot of time sweating in the engine room with Eric, she managed to escape the majority of her sorrows and remain hopeful. The working theory was that an object in motion stays in motion. They should reach their destination on time. The computer would continue to track their progress using simulated movement versus actual, and notify them when the time was up. It was ugly, but with hand scanners and radio links inside the spacesuits, they could still dock with the mining facility to offload their gear, take on the new payload, and conduct repairs while they were there. Until then, they still had almost 2 months of travel.
So what's your story? You told me you hadn't expected to end up here either, or something like that.
Kira asked her lover as the sweat cooled on their bodies. Eric smiled up at her. Kira felt her stomach flutter a little, and she knew it must have translated into a muscular movement based upon the way his eyebrows raised. She was sitting on top of him while he reclined against a metal-paneled wall.
Nothing too complicated. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Kira could appreciate that, but it wasn't an answer.
Isn't everybody?
I don't know. I can't think of a place I'd rather be right now.
He flexed his abs and prominent other muscles that caused Kira to blush at the tickle inside of her. She winked and said,
Good point. And yes, it is a very good point.
I'll tell you mine if you tell me yours.
Eric said after laughing with her. Kira bit her lip. It was why she could never play cards. Serious thought required serious introspection.
This is about you, not me.
Fair's fair.
She pouted and then shrugged.
Tell you what I'll give as good as I get. Deal?
So far you've done a great job of it.
You're a naughty boy.
She admonished, shifting her hips enough to let him know that she liked naughty.
Oh, good. I hope you spank me for it later.
Ooh, kinky, too.
Kira loved their conversations almost as much as she loved the sex. He made her feel so alive and so exciting. She had already done things she'd never dreamed she could do with him just because he made her feel so wanted. She almost regretted what might happen when they reached the mining station. She hadn't wanted to stay aboard the rented mule very long, but Eric had made some very convincing arguments without saying a word.
You haven't seen nothing yet, baby.
Eric promised. Kira felt a shiver run down her back.
Later now tell me why I get to ride this magnificent beast instead of some uppity princess on a core world.
Eric laughed again and then drew silent. He shrugged as he looked up at her.
You've got a keen eye. There have been a few uppity princesses in your place.
Kira knew her jaw was hanging open, but it seemed impossible to shut it. Her entire body felt like it belonged to someone else. She couldn't draw in a breath or explain the way her stomach seemed to have fallen through the deck of the ship.
Long time ago, Kira, but definitely wrong place and wrong time. I was a stupid kid who discovered girls while interning at an astrophysics lab.
Sleep with the boss's daughter.
Kira forced the question out as calmly as she could. It was stupid to expect him to not have been with anyone else, but he was just so damn good, it wasn't fair that she'd have to share him with anyone. She knew it was irrational, but just once she wanted something completely for herself.
No, the boss wasn't married. He wasn't into girls either. No, I had too much to drink one night and then ended up getting picked up by a lady.
That doesn't seem so bad.
It did, but for personal reasons and not ones that made sense to normal people.
Not a lady with a capital L. The governor's wife.
Oh,
Yeah, her daughter found out and she wanted some fun, too. At that level, you wouldn't believe what people will do. Everything's a game to them. It's appalling.
I bet you were thinking just that while you were slipping between their beds.
Eric grunted as she moved on top of him.
Yeah, maybe not so much. But afterwards I realized it. They just kept sucking me back in, though.
I bet.
She twisted her hips, feeling him swelling to his full size again. He'd left her walking funny for days already. This time, it was his turn. She was going to leave bruises.
The governor found out.
Eric said, and then gasped as Kira ground herself against him.
I'd had enough by then. I just wanted to get away. He had me brought in and demanded I do the right thing for his daughter, considering her condition.
Kira gasped and stopped.
She was.
I had no idea. She told me she couldn't. I mean, seriously, these days that doesn't happen without both parties' consent, especially in those circles. She must have had her sterility reversed secretly.
Wow, she really wanted you.
Kira stared down at him and realized she could understand why. He was wonderful. Well, he was a good man out of bed too.
But I didn't want her.
That didn't go over well, did it?
Turns out we'd succeeded at hiding our relationship from the mother too.
Oh shit, you mean?
Eric nodded.
How'd you get away?
I'm banned from that world, the official decree. Unofficially, I keep my head down because he has contracts out on me.
And the child?
Which one?
Kira slapped him on the chest.
Oh, you mean her being pregnant? No, it turned out the doc she went to wasn't legit. She got real sick from the complications and lost the baby. You'd better not ever do that to me.
Eric looked up at her and smiled.
You haven't said anything, but I guess you haven't had your sterility reversed.
I don't mean that.
Kira said, biting her lip briefly. The thought of having a child with him sent butterflies through her stomach. The good kind. She didn't know him very well, but she could see how the other girl had fallen for him.
I mean, you'd better not decide you don't want me.
Eric slid his hands up her sides and pulled her down to him. She resisted at first, but then let him bend her forward until her breasts were mashed against his chest. He stared into her eyes and said,
Impossible. I haven't even figured out all the different ways that I do want you.
Kira closed her eyes and let a tear slip out. She pushed her lips to his so he wouldn't see her and then crushed herself against him at both points of contact. Eric groaned beneath her, but that only prompted her to wiggle her hips and grind against him that much harder. In no time, she felt him swell larger than ever and stiffen beneath her. A moment later, he was gasping into her mouth, and she felt herself returning the gesture as she tried to melt into him. Several minutes passed before Eric kissed her again and said,
It's your turn, but there's one little thing I should probably mention.
Kira sat up on him, making him gulp loudly as she slipped him fully back inside of her.
If this is bad, I'm going to.
I love you, Kira.
Aw, fuck.
She muttered, her eyes tearing up even as she tried to look anywhere but at him.
Chapter 5.
You're sure on our speed?
Eric nodded.
Engine power is unaffected and the pushers are operating optimally. One took a ding, but it's been fixed.
All right, it's time to hit the bunks then. We'll go under for 4 weeks and then back up early in case there are problems.
Sharp said with everyone gathered in the galley. Kira knew Eric kept looking at her. Everyone did, it was obvious. After his profession of affection, she'd made an excuse and gotten the hell away from him. After 2 days of avoiding him, she was thinking it was time to rectify that situation. Being without him just didn't feel like fun. Not to mention she was starting to walk without any twinges. Sharp dismissed them to deal with any last-minute issues. She caught Eric watching her. She wanted to look at him, wanted to send him a smile or a wink or even a wave. She wanted to give him any sign, but she was afraid. It wasn't him she was afraid of. He'd done nothing but be perfect for her. No, she was afraid of herself. She forced herself to stare at the wall and clenched her stomach and fists tightly, wishing she could make all the confusion and heartache go away. Kira opened her eyes, unaware that she'd closed them. She gasped and reached out, grabbing the wall for support. She was in the engine control room with Eric. She looked around, her heart suddenly thundering in her chest. Nothing looked out of place aside from one of Eric's utility knives lying on the floor several feet away.
Eric, what happened? How'd I get here?
Eric swore softly.
You really don't know?
What? Did something happen? Did I black out? I used to do that when I was a kid. I even heard that I did some things during the blackouts.
How old are you?
I'm 37 Terran Standard Years.
Impossible. You look like you're 22.
Still upset, Kira shrugged his surprise off. She needed answers, not more dilemmas.
Good genetics, I guess. Other than this trip, I've never gone under cold sleep.
What about body mods? Cyber or genetic?
She held up her arm with a data input link on it.
Just this. I swear.
Eric swore again.
Tell me, Kira. Tell me why you're here. How'd it happen? When were you born? What's your story, your full story?
She looked at him, chewing on her lip even as her lip trembled. Here it was, the moment where she decided what her future held. Maybe she didn't know. She'd never tried telling her story to anyone before. Then again, she'd never let herself begin to trust anyone before.
I'm not crazy. Please believe me, I'm not crazy.
Eric stared at her, expressionless.
From the beginning.
Kira nodded, sniffing back unshed tears.
I'm Kira Eskew. I was born at the hydro farms in the near-Earth orbit. School was normal, friends were normal. Then I started having my blackouts when I hit my teen years. They came and went and I'm not sure what I did to get by, but I always had money. I got this data port during one of them, in fact.
Eric whistled softly.
That's one way to avoid the pain of surgery.
Kira smiled sadly.
I'd rather have the pain. Do you know what it's like having entire blocks of your life missing? I held different jobs: receptionist, model, aeroskimmer shuttle pilot, janitor, and a bunch of other entry-level things. It was always something new, and I never really knew how I got them.
That's amazing and terrifying.
Try annoying. Up until just now I haven't had a blackout in a couple of months. That's a record. Well, it was. I'd hoped they were over, but I guess not.
More tears fell, prompting Eric to step closer and gather her up in a comforting hug.
That's why I ran away. I'm scared of what's going to happen to me. And to you. I don't want to wake up somewhere else and not have you with me. Or what if I don't remember you at all?
5 million core script. That's the price on my head.
Eric said, out of nowhere. Kira stared at him for a long moment.
That's a lot of money. I can't think of a safer place for you, though. Always on the move and no real address or clue where you'll be next. No reason to trace your name either. Does anybody know you're on the rented mule?
He shook his head.
Just me. Us, I guess.
Well, that's my story. There's a lot of holes in it, but it's all I've got. I'm scared shitless of what always seems to happen to me, but I've never told anybody before either. Maybe I just needed to trust somebody to make it go away. Or maybe I'll never see you again.
Eric nodded and then looked away. When he looked back at her, he focused on her eyes and said,
I'm fucking crazy, but I believe you. Everything you've just said, I believe. I'm willing to risk it for you. Not anybody else, just you, Kira.
Kira found herself smiling. The smile faded quickly.
Why are you looking at me like that?
Just trying to make sure every part of you hears me, so that way I'm burned into your memory to keep you from pulling the blackout again.
Kira grinned at him.
I hope it works.
Me too. Now, come on, we've got a date with some hibernation bunks. Don't suppose the captain would let us share one.
Eric laughed.
Don't even ask, trust me. The good thing is the time will pass quickly.
Do we have time for me to apologize for running out on you? I bet we can squeeze it in.
Chapter 6.
Kira woke up slowly, coming out of a fog that she had to fight her way out of. She remembered something about a conversation she had with another woman, but she could never see her face. As the light intensified, her memory of the dream faded.
Kira? You with us?
Kira groaned and opened her eyes, squinting even though the lights had been turned low. A familiar figure loomed above her. She smiled in spite of herself and removed the attachments that allowed her body to enter the hibernation sleep. A moment later, he was helping her out of the tube and handing her a robe.
Want to help me out of my bed too?
Tarn called with a nasty leer in his voice. Thumb protruding between index and middle finger, Eric gave Tarn the universal gesture everyone throughout the Coalition worlds had only one definition for. Tarn laughed again.
Be at your stations in 15 minutes. I want to know what our status is.
Captain Sharp ordered. He headed off to his own quarters to change, leaving the rest to make do in the communal locker room.
If you hurry, you can get there before the men.
Eric urged. Kira's eyes widened. She winked at him and hurried off, thankful that her body was responding to a normal wake-up instead of the forced one. Until she stubbed her toe going through a hatch, that is. Limping, she still made it to the locker room before the others and slapped her hand across the occupied button. Breathing an unnecessary sigh of relief, she let the robe fall and turned to the full-length mirror. She studied herself, noting how growth during hibernation was effectively halted. Then again, she had always been exceptionally lucky when it came to her body. She seldom needed to use any depilatory creams, for example. Aside from her long hair that was currently dyed red, her body didn't seem to grow any. She'd wanted to get that checked out at a doctor's office, but the opportunity had never presented itself. Her fingernails and toenails were similar. They seemed to grow to a set length but never beyond. She'd gotten used to it over the years, but it still seemed bizarre. Kira looked up, looking in her own eyes. She jumped and spun around, looking for the dark shape that was behind her. There was no one there. She looked around, her heart beating quickly in her chest, but still no one was there. She turned her head to glance in the mirror again, but all was as it should be. Kira straightened and then wondered why she had been crouched so low she was almost on her hands and knees. She'd been comfortable, but why would she want to duck? She shook her head again and walked to her locker, intent on dressing quickly. She definitely wanted a shower before she had a chance to get Eric alone, but right now she was more interested in getting out of the locker room. No further peculiarities haunted her as she dressed and left the locker room behind. She walked past the 4 men waiting in the hall outside, with Tarn alone being the one to grunt.
Finally.
Eric just flashed her a smile and shrug, and then moved past her into the room to change. Kira considered waiting, but decided she'd do better to get to the bridge. She needed the captain happy with her, not frustrated, especially if she was really going to try and stick it out with Eric. Staying on the rented mule made the most sense to her, at least for now. She knew he'd stick up for her. It was the least she could do to give him the same respect.
That was fast.
Sharp said as he entered the bridge and took his seat. Kira smiled to herself. She'd heard him coming and smelled the cologne he'd splashed on. It wasn't out of any hopes of betting her, she knew, but just something he'd done until he could get a proper shower.
Yes, Captain. I wanted to see if 4 weeks of sleep might have given me any new ideas on how to fly a blind transport ship.
I like your attitude, Kira. This was a probationary milk run, but you've done a great job. Keep from screwing up and I might just keep you on. Not to mention, if I lose you, I lose my engineer, too.
Kira realized she was staring at him, too late to stop herself. He grinned.
Thought so.
Kira glared at him briefly and then turned away before he could see the heat in her cheeks or the smile that refused to let her lips stay down.
Just keep it quiet, okay? Last thing I need is Tan running around making cracks or thinking he deserves a piece.
Tarn couldn't get a piece with a handful of core script in the middle of a whorehouse.
Kira slapped her hand over her mouth, turning quickly to see the captain trying to stifle a laugh.
I'm sorry, sir, it just slipped out. I didn't.
Sharp held up his hand to stop her.
Yes, you did. It's okay, he's a pig. He's been with me a while and he wasn't always like this. Couple of lifetimes ago it seems Tan was a member of Marine First Team 1. He was a heavy weapons guy, specialized in exoplanet operations.
A fist. What happened to him?
Kira couldn't stop herself from asking. Marine FIST teams, First Insertion Special Tactics, were the best that the coalition of world's military had to offer. The Navy was better known for its ships and vast presence, but the Marines did the grunt work. FIST teams were the best the Marines had to offer. Elite and unstoppable. Plus, they had access to genetic engineering far beyond anything available to the regular population. Even royalty couldn't come close to the military upgrades FIST team members could pick and choose from. Sharp began his answer with a shrug.
He doesn't talk about it. Says it was time for him to move on, pay wasn't good enough or something.
Kira snorted. If he thought the pay babysitting a transport was better than the military pay plus the FIST team bonus, he was even dumber than she thought.
Doesn't smell right.
No. No, he never does smell right, does he? Now how's my ship doing?
Kira nodded and spun back around, smacking her knee in the process. She swore and rubbed it before resting her data port over the matching port on the station. She ordered a status check across the display at her station, picking and choosing what to route to the main display visible to everyone on the bridge. A few minutes later, she looked up to see Tarn and Eric had joined them. She frowned, upset that they had stepped foot on the bridge without her realizing it.
Kira.
Sharp asked, seeing her looking around.
Sir, we're still blind. Sensors are useless and our backup systems are passive, useless for navigation.
Done.
Tarn abused his station's buttons a few more times before he snarled and kicked it, leaving a minor dent in the steel panel.
Shot to hell, sir.
Our main external cameras are fried, too, right?
The mule wasn't designed with redundancy in mind, Captain. All the sensor feeds were in our main array.
Eric said.
Damn ship doesn't even have a window I can look out. Figure out how we can fix that, all of you. In the meantime, fix what can be fixed. Airlock, hull, whatever.
Eric left immediately, motioning to Jeff and Kevin to follow him. Tarn hung around a minute longer, staring at the back of Eric's head until he disappeared. Then he, too, left the bridge. Kira glanced at her station, wondering what use she could be. She had dozens of skills, but none of them seemed worth a damn on a transport vessel. Sure, she was a certified navigator, even though she didn't remember what made her decide to enroll in the training program. She could pose for a videographer, too, or clean the ship until it sparkled. None of that did a damn bit of good, though. She punched her station and stood up abruptly.
You too?
Sharp asked. Kira glared at him, and then remembered her position and backed down.
Sorry, sir, just frustrated.
Yeah, that makes all of us. Hell of a first run. You let Eric get some work done, you hear me?
Kira felt the deck open up beneath her. Rather than swallow her entire body, it only took her stomach. She nodded, refusing to look away, even though the blush on her cheeks gave her away.
I'd like to go and see if I can help, sir.
Sharp waved with his hand.
Can't make it any worse.
Kira jerked as though he'd slapped her. Was it her fault? Had she screwed up something and not realized it? He'd complimented her a few minutes ago. Now this? Or maybe the captain was just as upset as the rest of them. She nodded and hurried past him, trying to make sense of his moods and wondering if any of it was her fault. Kira cursed herself for how clueless she was. Falling for Eric was just making it worse for her. Normally she was reserved and careful because she knew a lot more went around her than she realized. Now she had that, and an obsession with a man dominating her thoughts. She was lucky she'd managed to put her clothes on, right? Kira stumbled to a halt, nearly losing her balance in the process. She reached down and pulled the waist of her pants out, just enough to let light in. She gasped, letting go of her waistline and slapping a hand to her mouth. She really was an idiot. She'd forgotten her underwear.
Chapter 7.
The repairs were finished, or at least as much as could be done with the material they had. What remained to be done they figured they'd take care of once they docked at the mining station. That left time only for stewing on their situation and trying to pass the time. Kira and Eric enjoyed the latter far more than the former. During a rare public appearance, Both sat in the galley eating a mushy mess of reconstituted meal replacement powders. Kira's had an orange flavor that was supposed to be reminiscent of an ancient Terran Chinese dish. It amazed Kira that after expanding to live on worlds hundreds of light years apart, humanity's diet still consisted almost exclusively of dishes that originated on Earth. The lack of successful terraforming and crop migration was the main cause of the limited diet. Earth plants only wanted to live on Earth, it seemed.
Captain Sharp said he'd keep me on so long as I didn't do anything stupid.
Kira said to him. She leaned a little closer and added in a hushed voice.
He was worried if he cut me loose he'd lose his engineer too.
Eric snorted and then coughed up some of the paste he'd been shoveling into his mouth.
Figures he'd know. I bet the others suspect, especially my guys, but Tarn's pretty stupid. John doesn't miss much, though.
Kira started at the name and then remembered Captain Sharp's first name was Jonathan. She smirked at how easily she'd forgotten that and put him on a pedestal.
So, would he?
Would he have lost his engineer? Depends on whether you wanted me to come along or not.
Eric pushed some of his mush around on his plate.
Would you?
Kira took a deep breath and smiled.
Yes. I'd be scared, but yes.
Why scared?
What if I had another blackout, and when I came out of it you were gone? Or worse, hurt. I don't know what happens during those times. I'd be scared for you, too. What if I left you and never came back? Promise me, Eric, if that ever happens, just let me go and move on with your life, okay? I couldn't bear the thought of you trying to find me. I get around, trust me, it's upsetting some of the places I find myself in.
So you have done some cold sleeps before?
I must have. Like you said, I look almost half my age. That only happens with hibernation.
Did you ever look back on what you had been doing to see if something happened?
She stared at her plate, silent and embarrassed. She felt herself growing distant, almost as though she was trying to pull away. She jerked her head up, a gasp escaping her throat.
Oh my Eric. No, I never did. I was just never interested in it. But that's not it. I think I just beat it.
Beat what? I don't understand.
She shook her head, her bright red mane flying.
No, you wouldn't. I'm sorry, I'm not making sense. Just now, I thought about your question, and I felt shameful for never questioning myself. Never looking back, I mean. I just went with it because that's what I felt I was supposed to do. There was always a feeling of fear of what I might find. But sitting here I started to retreat, to back away. It doesn't make sense, I know, but I felt like I was retreating.
Eric reached across the table and took her hand. She stared at it and smiled. Her vision blurred until she blinked it away.
Thank you,
she whispered and squeezed his hand for emphasis. She swallowed and tried again. Okay, so here I am feeling like I'm falling away, and suddenly I realized I was about to have another blackout. I don't know if it always happens like that or not, but I think I stopped it. I got scared. Really, really scared. I mean, stranded in a chunk of steel floating through space without eyes and ears scared. Anyhow, I fought back. I pulled myself out of it and came back. I came back to you. For you, I mean. Or for me, because of you, whatever you're the key here. He had a ruddy color to his cheeks that she found irresistible. She wanted to kiss him, but a sudden noise from the passage outside made her jerk her hand back quickly. Just in time, Tarn walked in. He stopped, seeing them together, and then grumbled something about them eating all the good food before he turned to make himself a meal.
I need to speak with Captain Sharp,
Eric said, nodding his head.
Have you got an idea?
Kira asked, confused by the abrupt change of topics. She knew better than to discuss anything personal in front of the ex-Marine, but beyond that, she was as lost as she claimed to be.
Something like that. Come on, I might need some help with astrogation.
Kira grabbed her plate and scraped it into the recycler, and then she stashed it in the dishwasher while Eric followed suit. He led the way out and up to the bridge, moving too quickly for her to ask him what he was going on about. "Captain?" Eric burst into the bridge, making the man jump in his chair.
Sir, I guess, need to talk to you.
Sharp scowled at them.
This better be about fixing my ship. We've been floating another week and nobody's got a clue what's going on. It stands shift on the hull, watching for the asteroid belt, but still nothing.
Kira looked at Eric and saw him looking back at her.
Sir, Tarn's in the mess hall.
It's a galley, this isn't an army barracks.
Right, galley. Sorry, sir.
Might make a space monkey out of you yet or not. Is that what this is about?
No, or not unless you decide it is.
Eric said. Sharp stared at him and then finally motioned for him to go on when Eric didn't say any more.
Sorry, just trying to figure out how to say this.
Eric said. He took a deep breath before plunging in.
Captain, when you hired me, I wasn't entirely truthful about my past.
Sharp chuckled.
You think anybody on this boat is?
All right, fair enough, but I think you really need to know this. There's a bounty on my head. A big one.
Sharp leaned back in his chair and crossed his hands in his lap.
What did you do?
Does it matter?
Kira interrupted.
You've got Tarn on here. Ethics and morality can't be too high on your priority list.
Sharp turned an icy glare on her.
Loyalty is my top priority, young lady. I care about morality to a point, but with a proper sense of loyalty it doesn't matter, so long as you're not breaking any laws on my ship.
He turned back to Eric.
So, what did you do? Kill somebody? Steal from somebody?
Nothing that impressive. I just slept with the wrong people.
People?
He nodded.
This sounds like a good story. Go on.
Eric sighed. Kira interrupted again.
I don't think that's any of your business, Captain.
It's my ship, it's my business. I'm judge, jury, and executioner here.
I spent time with both the wife and daughter of the Governor of Plentiful. When?
Wait. Both? Together? Like, at the same time?
Kira rolled her eyes while Eric laughed.
No. No, that would have been awkward.
I bet.
Kira teased.
Anyhow,
Eric continued in an exasperated tone.
the governor found out and I was banished, legally. Off the record, he put a contract on my head. 5 million in core script.
5 million. You cuckolded him and banged his daughter at the same time, more or less. Wait, was she of age? You know what? Don't tell me, I might not want to know.
Kira smirked. If Sharp only knew just how ruined any woman who'd been with Eric would be for another man, he'd think 5 million was a pittance.
There were some medical issues. But I decided you should know. I've been with you a few years now and it's been smooth sailing, by and large. Sooner or later somebody's going to find me. Doesn't seem right me putting you all at risk because of something I done when I was a stupid kid.
No, it's not right, and you should feel downright ashamed of yourself for hiding it from me. Matter of fact, if you'd have told me that when we first met, there's no way you'd be on the mule right now.
Kira saw the muscles tense in Eric's jaw. She reached over and took his hand in hers, trying to coax some of the tension out of him.
That's a port we won't go back to, though.
Sharp added.
You've been a damn fine engineer for me and I don't take that service lightly. You want to leave, I won't stop you, but you've been taking care of the mule for me and I take care of my own. Same reason I haven't spaced on for the dumb shit he's done lately.
Eric relaxed and then glanced at Kira.
You know about us?
Walls of this old bird don't block as much sound as they used to.
Kira wanted to die. She grabbed Eric's hand, and that alone kept her from running out the hatch and leaping into the airlock herself, especially now that it was fixed.
If tons in the galley, doesn't that make it your shift up on the hull, Mr. Sackman?
Eric nodded and gave Kira's hand a squeeze. They started to leave, but were stopped by the captain calling Kira back. With a nervous flutter in her stomach, she waved goodbye to Eric and turned to face the captain.
It's been itching at me for a while and I just can't figure it out. That's unusual. Most things I can't figure I don't let get to me.
He began, and then paused to look at her. Kira felt a weight press on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Was the captain making a pass at her? Or worse, was he going to extort her into doing something?
I was contacted by somebody with no name and no face, you see. Someone that offered me a tidy sum to take you on. Quarter of it was just to agree to meet you, the remainder is released when we check in at the mining station.
Captain Sharp studied her, his eyes trying to pierce the skin from her face. Kira stood steady. She had no idea what he was talking about. She had no relatives or mysterious benefactors out there. Her parents had died when she was a child, innocent bystanders killed in an uprising over food.
I thought maybe that somebody was you. Computer disguises the voice, darkens and blurs the image, you know how it is. Looking at you now though, I see you've got no idea.
No, sir. I'm about the loneliest person the universe has ever seen.
I see, just you and whoever you're shaking up with, and they're just the flavor of the week.
No.
She fell silent after blurting out her answer. It pissed her off. What she felt was real. She'd never trusted herself to have a boyfriend or more than an occasional lover. She gave up trying until Eric, or at least she thought she gave up. Her blackouts lasted months sometimes. Maybe she was shacking up with any flavor of the week. He waved the question away.
None of my business. What you do on your time is your business, not mine. Long as it don't bring trouble to my ship or crew, you can screw whoever you want and I'll just sit back and be envious.
Envious.
Kira asked, disrupted from her depressing thoughts by his choice of words.
Yeah, you're getting some action and I'm stuck doing yelling at everyone to do the shit they've done 100 times before.
Kira smirked. The last thing she wanted to do was smile, especially with the things Captain Sharp was saying, but she couldn't help it.
You're a good navigator. A little inexperienced sometimes, but you've also come up with some things I wouldn't have expected. I did a little checking into you, but everything checks out fine, even if you like to move around a lot. I wasn't supposed to. That mysterious benefactor of yours wanted me to take you on sight unseen. I can't operate like that.
I tell you what though, I'll split this signing bonus with you 50-50. If you keep your head on your shoulders, you keep Eric in line, you don't go disrupting my ship, and if you can come up with some way of keeping us from smashing the mule to pieces when it comes docking time. Kira stared at him until her eyes started to hurt from the strain. She nodded and looked away, her eyes going to her station.
Yes, sir. But sir, if Eric leaves, I have to go with him. He's all I've got.
I understand, Kira. Trust me, I understand.
She looked up at him sharply.
Was there someone?
Sharp's eyes focused, and he looked at her. He chuckled and shook his head.
A girl? No, they just hold a good man back. Look around you, the mule. She's my pride and joy. She might not be much, but she means I'm a free man in charge of my own life. You don't turn your back on that sort of thing, not if you got two working gray cells between your ears.
Kira thought his sentimentality over the transport they were on was silly, but aside from a raised eyebrow, she tried to keep it off her face. Sharp chuckled.
That's all right. I've got your secrets, you can keep mine, too.
Kira smiled. It wasn't much, but it was something. She nodded and went to her station, sitting down and plugging herself into the data port to try and think outside of the box. No sooner had she sat down than her stomach felt funny, as though it had moved without her body going with it. It wasn't an emotional lurch, nor was it a reaction to a bad lunch. She frowned and started working on her station, losing herself as she input data into it.
Sir.
Kira gasped a few minutes later. She stood up and turned to face him.
We've just been damaged.
What? Buy another ship. We are under fire.
No, well, I don't think so. Passive sensors aren't picking up anything. There was an explosion aft.
Internal.
External. Our engines are fine, but the pushers have readings all over the place.
Sharp slammed his hand down on the intercom.
All hands report.
He turned back to her.
Get your boyfriend to check the damage out.
Kira's cheeks burned even as she felt a small thrill deep in her heart from hearing the words spoken publicly. She picked up a microphone and triggered the suit radio channel.
Eric, do you read? This is Kira on the bridge of the rented mule.
Hang on, Kira, something just happened. Damn near ripped my tether off and snapped my spine. I'm checking it out now.
Eric said. Kira sucked in a breath, worried for him.
Be careful. Check the pushers.
Tarn was the last to report to the bridge, as usual. Jeff and Kevin stood by, looking uncomfortable even though Kevin was trying to overcompensate by leaning casually against a bulkhead. Sharp held up his hand and looked at Kira, waiting for Eric to report in. His timing was impeccable.
Kira, something blew up. I don't know if we were hit or what, but all 4 main pushers are damaged. 1 and 3 are out completely, 2 is operating at about 20%, and 4 is close to 80%, but its orientation has been shifted. We're drifting off course. I recommend we shut them down to fix, or we'll have to burn fuel with the thrusters to compensate.
Kira turned to Sharp, while Jeff and Kevin both gasped. Tarn spat out something vile, but offered nothing more.
Captain, the pushers maintain thrust, losing them won't slow us down. It just prevents us from accelerating further. Our intent was to use them until we found the mining belt, and then rotate to slow down and dock. Shutting them down won't hurt us, other than making us take longer.
Longer. We are already overdue.
Sharp spat out. He gripped the arm of his chair tightly and then snapped.
Turn them off. We fix them and figure out where the hell we are at.
Sir, we don't.
You find a fucking way to do it. There are stars out there, right? Figure out how far they are and triangulate our position. They did it 500 years ago, sailing on water on Earth. I think we are a little bit more educated than they were.
Kira paled and went to answer him, but Sharp was already up and headed out the door.
Tan, stand ready in case this was an attack. Jeff, Kevin, get out there and help Eric conduct repairs.
They dispersed quickly, asking no questions and offering no problems. Even Tarn moved efficiently, something Kira had never seen before. She bit her lip, trying to figure out what was bothering her, and then turned back to her station. The ship was dying. Every event took another chunk of it from them, leaving them more and more stranded. A ship in the core systems had a chance of recovery. For them, stranded somewhere near the rim, there was little hope unless they could make it happen. Even if they could generate a distress beacon, it would take weeks, months, or years for it to be heard, and then twice as long for help to come. Twice as long at best. She fought down a rising wave of panic in her, blinking back sudden tears, and focused instead on trying to figure out ways to locate the needle in the haystack that the rented mule was.
Chapter 8.
So what happened?
Sharp demanded once Eric was back on the bridge. He was limping, Kira noticed, and seemed thoroughly exhausted.
The pushers are ionic, slow, but powerful thrust over time.
The captain scowled at him.
Right, you know that, sorry. Well, the point is they wouldn't explode on their own. The damage wasn't internal.
So we were attacked.
Kira interrupted with a squeak in her voice.
I can't say for certain. I mean, if we were, why haven't they followed it up? We're floating in space with nothing but thrusters right now and not enough fuel for them to make a difference, outside of dodging some rocks. And that's if we could see to use them.
Captain, I had an idea about that.
Kira interrupted again.
That's why I never had a woman on my ship before. They can't keep their damn mouths shut.
Kira's head jerked back in surprise at the rebuke. She recovered quickly. Her idea had merit, damn it. She glared back at him and took the risk of sticking her tongue out. The captain's eyes widened, and a laugh burst from his lips.
All right, out with it.
Eric can reroute the NAV controls to the hull. I can patch myself in from there in a suit and visually steer the ship when we get to the asteroid belt.
Manually steering a ship the size of the rented mule. You've got balls, Kira, I'll give you that.
Sharp said. He leaned back and clasped his hands together, pondering the idea.
You really think you can do it? Some pretty intense calculations have to be made to dock a ship, let alone dodge the rocks floating around.
Kira shrugged.
I have to try. What other option do we have?
All right, I'll think about it. Now, about this damage.
It wasn't just a single hit. Either we've been sabotaged or there's a damn good gunner out there.
Eric said.
Sabotage.
Sharp's eyes narrowed. He stared hard at both of them.
I haven't been out of the ship yet.
Kira pointed out.
I damn near had my spine broke when we were hit. I was outside of the inertial suppressor field.
Eric said. Sharp grunted. His fingers tapped a cadence on the arm of his chair.
Sir, Tarn came back early from his shift, remember?
You think Tan did this?
Does anybody else have knowledge of how to rig an explosion and make it look like an accident or an external attack?
Sharp opened and closed his mouth. He growled and stood up.
Weapons locker, now. You two are with me.
Captain, do you really think Tarn would do this? He's stranded with us, too.
Eric said, following behind the captain as he walked briskly down the passage.
Any chance he overheard you talking about the bounty on your head?
Sharp snapped. Kira gasped, drawing looks from the other two. She waved her hand.
It's nothing. I just hadn't thought of that is all.
They rounded a corner and stopped at a hatch. Captain Sharp unlocked the door with a retinal scan and then stepped in and beckoned them to follow. He stopped, causing Eric and Kira to run into him.
Son of a bitch. I'm going to kill him with my bare hands. Sir, if he was a fist, he's not going to be easy to kill. Even if he is old and fat.
The weapons locker was virtually empty. All that remained were a couple of low-grade laser pistols, with output ratings low enough to require several seconds for a burn-through on an unarmored human target. An alarm rang through the ship, making Eric jump. Sharp turned with a snarl and started back towards the hatch.
Sir, wait.
Kira spotted a display and, near it, a data port. She hurried over and pushed her hand against it, and then started commanding the computer to display the source of the alarm.
Our passive sensors picked up an active sensor hit. And there's another, they're coming in fast.
They. How many are there?
Looks like 5, no SI-9 of them, sir.
9? Why didn't you see 9 ships out there?
Sir, they may not be ships. Could be EVA suits. They disable us and then send in a boarding party to take control of the ship. After it's secured, they bring in theirs and tow us off for salvage.
She suggested. Kira saw a strange look in Eric's eyes.
What? It makes sense. That's what I'd do.
You have a history of disabling and stealing ships.
Well, no. I just mean when you think about it and break it down.
Eric went over and grabbed both of the pistols. He handed one to the captain and the other to Kira. She looked at it with wide eyes.
I've never used a gun before.
Me either, but I've got a hunch you'll be a better shot than I would.
Eric wouldn't look her in the eyes as he spoke. Kira slipped it into the waist of her pants without thinking. She turned to see the captain watching the two of them.
All right, these things will be useless against an armed and armored boarding party, but maybe if we don't fire them they won't know it. You think they'll override the airlock or blow a hole in the hull?
If they've got inside help, they'll use the airlock. Or if they want to use the ship themselves, they'll need it pressurized.
Eric theorized.
Doesn't make me a betting man.
Sharp's laugh was bitter.
You just wagered all our lives.
Eric swore. Kira's eyes widened, but she gave him a supportive smile.
If it makes you feel any better, I'll even take off my clothes to show my support.
Remember when I said to make sure you don't disrupt my crew or complicate things? That goes double when we're repelling borders.
Eric chuckled.
Had that talk, did you? Just think of what it might do to the pirates.
Kira turned, having heard it first. Her pistol was out of her pants and pointed at the open hatch before Tarn rounded the corner and pulled up short. Sharp swore and pointed his own pistol at the man.
We beat you here, Tan.
He asked.
Yeah. Now put those useless things down. You wasn't on the bridge, so I brought you these.
Tarn grabbed the straps over his shoulder and pulled off 2 assault plasma rifles.
Anybody ever shoot one of these?
Kira noticed Eric was looking at her out of the corner of her eye. She glared at Tarn a minute longer and then lowered her pistol. She glanced at her lover and saw him still looking at her.
What? No, I've never shot one. I don't even know what kind of gun it is.
You handled that pistol pretty well.
Tarn observed.
Beginner's luck.
She said through clenched teeth.
Give me one.
Sharp said, stepping forward and taking the rifle. He checked the weapon over quickly and then looked at Tarn until the ex-marine gave him a quick rundown of the weapon. When he was finished, the captain fixed him with a stare.
What happened to the rest of the weapons?
Tarn pointed at the 2 plasma rifles.
Trade them for these. These babies are mil-spec. Not heavy-duty like I'm used to, but good enough for pirates. Not what they use these days. That's how I could get a break on them.
All my weapons for these.
Sharp persisted. Tarn shrugged.
Wait till you see one in action.
Sharp scowled and turned to Eric. He handed him the laser pistol.
Kira, patch back to the computer and let Jeff and Kevin know to grab whatever they can for a weapon and lay low.
Kira did as she'd been told. A moment later, the synthetic voice of the ship's computer came across broadcasting throughout the ship. While she was there, she checked on the progress of the boarding party.
Sir, based on the rate of closure, they should reach us in a few more minutes.
Don't you want them to be with us?
Eric asked.
You left them on the hull or are they on the ship?
Shit.
Yeah, that's why Kira sent out the message. The computer will have broadcast on the suit's frequency as well.
That's why he's the captain.
Kira said. Eric shot her a dark look, but couldn't hold it.
Main airlock, let's go.
They filed out, falling in behind Tarn and the captain. Kira's eyes went to Tarn's rolls, noticing the higher quality pistol at his hip. She also picked out a bulge in his boot that she assumed was a backup gun. A moment later, as he stepped over the entry to another hatch, she saw his shirt rise enough to display the handle of a high-tech combat knife. She gasped as Eric grabbed her hand. She glanced at him, and he nodded for her to hold back with him. She did, asking him the question with her eyes that she dared not utter aloud. He pulled her after him, turning down a passage to the crew's bunkroom.
Baby, this isn't the best time for this.
Kira said.
I'll admit, I can't think of another time when we'd have the bunks to ourselves, though.
Eric snorted.
Open your locker.
Eric.
Do it.
Kira jerked back at his tone. She nodded and turned to the wall with the crew's storage lockers in it. It scanned her eye, releasing the lock, and she opened it up before stepping back.
There, you want to go through my underwear now?
Maybe.
Eric said. He scanned everything quickly and then started pulling open the drawers and rooting around in them.
Eric, seriously, what are you doing?
I knew it.
He gloated.
This drawer doesn't track right. Hang on. He fiddled with the drawer for a moment before he pulled it out of the locker and set it on the floor. He reached back in and pulled out a slim box that had been stashed beneath it. Open this.
Kira looked at it and felt herself start to retreat inward again. She shook her head, not at the action, but at the thought of losing herself. With a mewl of frustration, she swallowed past the lump in her throat and reached forward to press both her thumbs against the ID scanners on it. It chirped and clicked, letting her know the locks were released. She opened the case and let loose the breath she had not known she was holding. Inside was a folded piece of cloth that shimmered in the light. Eric let out his own gasp, drawing Kira's gaze.
I thought there'd be something else.
Kira reached in with trembling hands and picked it up. It unfolded, hanging loosely in her hands until she stretched it taut as she held it up.
What is that? Laundry?
She shook her head.
It's a bodysuit designed to defuse energy weapons. It offers protection against any radiant beam weapon, but not something like a plasma weapon. Those have a highly energized form of matter.
How do you know that?
She looked at him and saw the pale color of his cheeks.
Eric, this is mine. I don't know how I've never seen it before, but it opened to my thumbprints. And I can't think of a better time to find out.
Find out what?
His question went unanswered. She stood up and stripped off her clothes, standing nude in front of him in the single least sexual moment she could ever remember being in. She slipped the diffusion suit on, pulling the shimmering material into place and noting how it fit her perfectly.
Wow. I know this is pretty crude of me, but you're beautiful. That is crude, but there's never a bad time to tell me I'm beautiful. What I need to know is how you knew it was there.
Eric fell silent. She saw him struggling internally. His eyes dropped and he gasped. She followed his gaze and saw what had stolen his breath. She dropped to her knees and reached in, pulling out the strange pieces of metal that the bodysuit had hidden. Her hands slid across them, feeling a sense of familiarity, even though she had no idea what she was doing. She looked at Eric, meeting his gaze, and then closed her eyes. Her hands worked the items, putting them together in a smooth and practiced manner that left a dryness in her mouth. When Kira opened her eyes, she held a rifle in her hand that was lightweight and possessed a deadly beauty. Her eyes went to a magazine that was loaded full of ellipsoid shapes, with each narrow end coming to a point. She slipped it into the rifle and cycled around into the chamber.
Damn.
Yeah.
Kira said, and then she looked up abruptly.
Shit. The others. We've got to help them.
You really know how to use that?
Eric stood up and asked. Kira rose as well.
No, but I've got a hunch I'll figure it out. Come on. And Eric, you're going to tell me how you knew about this later. I don't even want to think about it right now, but as soon as this is over I'm going to seriously freak out, and either I'm going to need you there to hold me, or I'm going to need you there so I can slap you silly.
Eric grinned.
So long as you need me.
He followed her out of the bunk room and back towards the main airlock, where their shipmates were presumably waiting for them.
End of part 1 of New Beginning. Thank you for listening. Be sure to check back for part 2 of New Beginnings, and then the dozens of other stories in the Vitalis series.